Hello, everyone, and welcome to This Week in San Diego Soccer History. I'm John Cross, along with Dylan Wilson. Dylan, how are you doing this evening?
I'm doing all right. Enjoying the World Cup knockout rounds very much. It's been a lot of good games, and I'm firmly on team expanding the cup was a good call, especially with the
Yeah?
number of African nations that have done very well. Yeah. Um, I also burnt the shit out of my lip on some pizza you can see right here, but I'm recovering, thankfully, as hard as that's been. So
Good that you're recovering. I agree with you. I think I might be on team expansion. I don't know if I'm on expansion for 64, though, if we start
no,
heading that
that's
direction.
I do think that's too much, though. I wouldn't be shocked if they did push that in the end.
Right. But I have been enjoying the round, and I think one of the things as a neutral, mostly, been enjoying, I saw some stats during one of the games earlier today that um, there have been 25 goals scored after the 90th minute in matches so far in this World Cup. That's
Wow.
um, that's pretty incredible, and I think lends to the entertainment value of the match, especially as a neutral when someone can pull it out and or do some crazy things like the last group match that was played between Austria and Algeria,
That
where
that match was great too because that had every reason to be a boring match. A draw was good enough for both teams, but
and it
genuinely
was
one of the best
boring
games.
for the last
But it
15 minutes
until it wasn't though.
until it wasn't exactly.
I saw a lot of people
Yeah,
saying they had like turned it off already. It's like, well, that's why you don't do that.
right. And then you probably saw the score and thought it was a misprint
Yeah,
if you did that, because it certainly looked like they were both just riding out the 2-2 draw. Um, yeah, crazy things, but it's fun. Good to see, as you said, some of the teams we wouldn't historically suspect making it as deep. Even right now, I know with this first time we've had a round of 32, but having some teams make it past that first knockout round, getting to the round of 16, like a Canada, Norway. So those are, it's going to be a fun World Cup, I think, the rest of the way out for the teams. But I have to say, caught the very end of as we're recording this on a Tuesday between matches. So the France Sweden match just wrapped up, and France still, of all the teams, I mean, they clearly look the best. Um, but I think, like a lot of teams have shown, on any day, someone can beat someone else. There's no guarantees. I think, if I had to put money on it, I'd put money on France. But um, you never know. That's why we play the games and the tournament, and that's why I think as neutrals we enjoy it as well.
agreed. Yeah, I definitely see France going all the way. Just they've been playing so well, and the attack is just ridiculous. I mean, you could go down the list and just and this guy and this guy and this guy and this guy. I mean, they've got like two Golden Boot contenders, so yeah, it's absurd.
Yeah, their squad and squad depth is
Yeah,
just ridiculous. It's the kind of thing we used to associate, I would say, with a country like Brazil. Um, but yeah, the France squad, their depth, the quality of players are just they're fun to watch. They really are. They are clearly a notch above everyone else at this stage in the tournament. We'll see if that keeps up. All right, well, let's jump in to the answer to our trivia question from last week. And before we put it up on the screen, a couple corrections, I guess. Uh, had some This part of the trouble with doing research, had a little bit of bad information on the date, at least, for what we gave for the trivia question last week, and I'll pull it up in just a second. So I'm going to leave it with the question or the date that we had. The answer still isn't going to change, but we'll talk a little bit about the date, and then that's part of what we do in between these episodes as we do the research, is to try to confirm all the dates and things, because you do frequently get conflicting information from different sources, so you have to try to find enough reliable sources to pin that information down. And the information that we did use for the trivia question was incorrect, so let me pull it up on the screen right now. What we had was on June 30th, 2001. Two San Pasqual High School graduates started a match for the U.S. women's national team. And can you name both players? Now, in that particular match, those players did not start together. And that was partly what we were trying to go for. What was the first match that these two started together? We'll give you the correct date in just a second, but the answer doesn't change. It's still the same high school. It's still the same people. We had the date wrong with that. Dylan, I think last time you said you thought you might know who one of them were.
I do. I have.
So, any guesses?
I do. I'm going to go with my regular San Diego women's football guess, that being Shannon MacMillan.
And you would be 100% correct on that. Shannon MacMillan, probably the best known graduate of San Pasqual High School in terms of soccer. She is definitely one of the answers there. And let me get ready to put both answers. So Shannon MacMillan is first one. She graduated in 92. And Nikki Serlenga, who graduated 4 years later in 1996. So those were the answers to the trivia question. And actually, Nikki Serlenga is going to be the topic of our episode today. And anybody who actually paid attention to the title of our episode, you had a hint there. But the actual date for the time they first started together on the national team, it was actually the first time they were ever on the field together as U.S. women's national team players, was on May 5th, 2000. It was a match against Mexico. It was the opening match of the Nike U.S. Women's Cup. It was a match that the U.S. would win handily, 8-0. And by most accounts, it was pretty unremarkable, other than being one of the two and getting ready for the 2000 Olympics. But it's the first time we believe, and as best we can find out, that non-sibling players that graduate from the same high school started in the same match for the U.S. women's team. We have had sisters who have played together and went to the same high school together, but this is the first time that we think there were two non-siblings from the same high school that started the same match for the U.S. women's national team. So that correct date is May 5th, 2000. And, you know, it's kind of a quirky stat, I guess, an interesting thing for us here in San Diego. And especially for us locally, I think there is a lot of information out there about Shannon MacMillan, and her story and soccer career is pretty well known by most people in San Diego. So tonight, we're going to really focus on the other San Pasqual graduate, Nikki Serlenga. So that will be our main topic this week. But first, we'll get into some of the birthdays. We have quite a few birthdays for this week. And we'll just give a shout to Nikki Serlenga because she just had a birthday on the 20th of June. So happy birthday to her. Also, again, we record this on a Tuesday. So our date today is Tuesday, June 30th, 2026. Yesterday on June 29th, Shannon Box, former San Diego Spirit and U.S. women's national team star, had a birthday. Coming up on Thursday, July 2nd, Alex Morgan of our local San Diego Wave fame, part owner, and had her jersey retired, right? What else, besides all the other things about Alex Morgan? What San Diego things can we say about Alex Morgan?
Well, I think she is living here in San Diego County these days, right? Or am I misremembering that? Okay. Yeah, so big shout out to Alex Morgan. Has a birthday coming up on July 2nd. On July 3rd, we have two people. Alan Mayer, who is a longtime goalkeeper in the first iteration of the San Diego Sockers. Goalkeeper when they were both doing outdoor and indoor in the NASL. Also on Friday, July 3rd, Clay Koyman has a birthday. SDSU star and U.S. men's national team star, especially for the 1994 World Cup team. And actually an answer, very recent answer to a trivia question we had on the show about SDSU's connection to the 1994 World Cup. On the 4th of July, we have San Diego Loyal star Elijah Martin has his birthday. Did you remember that his birthday was on the 4th of July, Dylan? I did not remember that. Well, happy birthday to Elijah and also America, I guess.
Yeah, I vaguely remember that from before when the Loyal were playing. But also San Diego Wave star Dudina. It's her birthday on the 4th of July. So wish her not only a happy birthday, but a speedy recovery from her recent ACL injury. And then that's all I have for this week. But, you know, sometimes it's kind of hit and miss if we get birthdays and birthday announcements for people. So we had quite a few this week. Don't have any special news and current events from the last week, other than maybe a shout out to the Nomads UPSL team, which has made it into the national round of 32 for the UPSL playoffs. We'll talk about that a little bit more at the end of the show for people who might want to catch some local soccer this weekend. All right, Dylan, before we do our in-show trivia question and get ready for our main topic, is there anything that you can think of that we missed?
I don't believe so. I think you got it all, as far as I'm aware.
All right, so here is our question. And for this one, we don't normally do this, but in this particular episode, we will actually give the answer during our main topic. So we'll see how well people are paying attention. See if you get the answer at the end. As we said before, we believe that Nikki Serlenga and Shannon MacMillan made history as the first non-sibling players from the same high school to start a match together for the U.S. women's national team. So our question for this time around is, get the right one up here. All right, how many times did Nikki Serlenga and Shannon MacMillan start together for the U.S. women's national team? Now, obviously, we're working for a single number, but I'll give a couple of hints here for you, Dylan, especially. We'll give you a chance to guess towards the end. They were on the same competitive game day roster together well more than 20 times over the times they crossed paths on the national team. For position, Serlenga was a defensive midfielder when she played with the national team. MacMillan was a midfielder / forward, depending on formation and where she was playing. And all their starts together happened during the year 2000. That was the only time where they crossed paths, then they started together. And the last hint I'll give is the answer is in single digits, that they actually started matches together. So we will leave that kind of there. Well, I guess we'll answer it at the end of our main topic here about Nikki Serlenga. So Dylan, before we get started, any thoughts or comments?
No, I will be paying attention for the answer, though.
All right. All right, let's jump into it. On, as we said, May 5th, 2000, the U.S. women's national team faced off against in that match in Mexico, which they won 8-0. And again, not very remarkable match, other than the fact, especially for us here in San Diego, 2 San Diegans started on that squad. And not just 2 San Diegans from the same high school, Shannon MacMillan and Nikki Serlenga. Now, for the, actually, we'll come back to this part here in a second, because I didn't realize we were giving away the clue so early. So I'm going to do this actually a little closer to the wrap up. There were quite a few times that they played together in that year 2000. And as we said before, rather than kind of tell both their stories, and especially about this one-off match, we thought this was a good opportunity to tell the story of the other San Pasqual High School soccer star. And really, I should qualify that. These are not the only 2. But for our story here, we decided we'd focus on Nikki Serlenga to let people know her story, and especially her path to the U.S. women's national team and then the 2000 Olympics for that year, how she came to be a star with the Altanta Beat in the WUSA and helped them to 2 WUSA finals, and then her total disappearance from the game after the WUSA folded. So those are the kind of highlights that we will hit as we cover Serlenga's story. So again, Dylan, before we actually jump into her story after that lead, any thoughts or comments?
I guess just one question. The Nike US Women's Cup, is that just called something else now, or does it just not exist anymore?
I don't think it exists anymore, but it
Okay.
was a little bit of a mirror of the men's US Open Cup that they had for a while, especially in the early 90s, to get the men prepared for international competitions as they were leading into the 94 World Cup. So it was, again, and this was also at a time, right, where the women played together a lot. We didn't have a professional league for the women yet, so we would manufacture in this country tournaments, bring over strong competitive teams in order to get them games. And this was just one of those many tournaments. But I do not believe it exists in any form nowadays, especially with, the NWSL in play. All right, let's go ahead and jump in. And we'll start way back at the beginning for Nikki Serlenga. She always seemed to be a standout at soccer. She started playing, I guess, competitive organized soccer as a 5-year-old. Her first games were at Kit Carson Park, kind of near where I am here in Escondido. She was coached by her mom, and the name of that first team was the Care Bears. Very, very appropriate, I think, for the
Love that.
time and the recreation level of the game. But by her own admission, a little bit later, reflecting back on this early time period, where, as we all know, at that age, there's a handful of kids who might be interested in playing the game, and there's certainly a lot of kids that are easily distracted by all kinds of other things that are going on in and around the soccer field when you're playing at 5 and 6 years old. Well, Serlenga was definitely one of those ones who wanted to play. And she wanted the ball and she wanted it all the time. And as she grew up, very quickly felt that the girls' leagues and girls' games they were too slow. She wanted better competition. So she started playing on boys' teams very early on. Initially, her mother was very supportive of her playing with the boys, but her father took a little bit more time to come around playing with the boys. And it might be because Serlingo was a little shorter in stature. I think she eventually topped out at a generous 5'5" in her professional days. But she was always pretty short, but she was tenacious. It could use the English saying, she was always ready to get stuck in, and she certainly had the skill level to keep up with the boys, especially at a youth age. And later in some interviews, Serlenga would say that playing against the boys at that age helped make her quicker, her just decision making quicker, her movement quicker on her feet, and sharpened her soccer instincts. Eventually, she would move to competitive girls soccer club teams, and in San Diego area, we certainly have a host of those, especially around that time period. And by age 13, she was actually making appearances on under 19 teams. In fact, this would be until they would cross paths again with the U.S. women's national team. This would be the first time, and only in brief occasions, that Serlenga and MacMillan would actually play together on the same team. Serlenga as a 13-year-old with the La Jolla Nomads. Even though Shannon MacMillan was 4 years older, and even though Serlenga was short, right, she could keep up with everyone else. Eventually, though, she would shift and start playing for the Surf in terms of clubs, but she almost always, through her club career, played more of attacking midfield role. Eventually, but coaches, I'd say before we get into high school, always noticed that while she was good at scoring, she was good with the ball, and she could pass the ball well, I think most coaches seem to really notice her ability to tackle and read the game, to intercept passes, and really were impressed with her defensive abilities. So when she gets to high school, and at this time, San Pasqual High School has a pretty strong program. It wasn't just Shannon MacMillan coming through. There were lots of strong players in San Pasqual, like a few others. Valhalla, Torrey Pines in Division II locally were very strong at soccer at this time. She gets to high school, and she gets there, right, the summer of 92. Shannon MacMillan goes off to Portland to start her college career, and in comes Nikki Serlenga to San Pasqual High School to start her high school career. And in that freshman year, her coach at the time, local legendary coach, Sam Tant, felt that she would best help out the team if she played a sweeper role rather than her normal attacking midfield role, which she did. That's where she ended up playing all season. The team went pretty deep in the playoffs. They'd lose in the semifinals to Valhalla High School, who I think ended up winning that particular year. And looking back later, the coach said she never complained about playing in that position as a sweeper. And again, later Serlenga would reflect about her freshman year, saying she hated every minute of it. She hated being back there in the back, last line of defense. She really wanted to be more involved in the middle of the field. But even still, she made her all-league team as a freshman, playing out of position, and she made all CIF playing out of position at that sweeper as a freshman. Then comes her sophomore year, and I read a newspaper account where she said something to the effect of, she's 5'2" on a warm day or something like that. So she still, wasn't very tall compared to her peers. She did get moved to central midfielder, and at the time I couldn't get a stat for the end of the season, but at the time this article was written was well into the season, getting close to playoffs. And in the first 20 games as a sophomore, now moving up to her central midfield role, she had scored 32 goals in that season as a sophomore. She was named the co-player of the year for the Avocado League, and they would lose to the semifinals again, I think, to the eventual champion, which this year would have been Torrey Pines. But that was it for her high school career. She actually opted to pass on her junior and senior years of high school and instead focus solely on club soccer. Where she played with the under-19 team for the Surf, where that team won several regional tournaments around the nation. The San Pasqual High School team, though, like I said, it was a very good team, and there were lots of good players on this team at the time. And even though she was recognized as one of the better players coming in as a freshman and a sophomore and got all these accolades, that team would go on her junior year to make it to the finals and lose, and her senior year make it to the finals and win, although she was not part, again, of either of those two teams, focusing just on her club play. Now, this gets us to the summer of '96. She's finished high school. She's getting ready to go to college. And at this point, Serlenga had developed a bit of a reputation among coaches. On the one hand, there's certainly some of the obvious skill that she has in playing at her position, but some coaches found her to be, I will use the word arrogant. Some people felt she lacked a commitment to the game, where she played club, but she didn't play high school. She didn't seem like someone who really wanted to go far with soccer. It wasn't all consuming for her. And while she would, do well at practices and trainings, give her all while she was there, she didn't really do much outside by all accounts. And that really rubbed some people the wrong way, or at least they felt, she didn't, she wasn't seriously committed to soccer as something more beyond, say, high school or club soccer. She was known to be outspoken and brash, which led some coaches to believe she had an attitude problem. So these were all things weighing against her, but she did eventually land at Santa Clara University. She goes there along with Mandy Clemens, fellow San Diegan, graduated the same time, and she was the CIF Player of the Year for San Diego. So they both commit to go to Santa Clara University, where they're going to join Jen Lawler, who on a previous iteration of our podcast together, we did a big episode on. And Jen Lawler graduated around the same time as Shannon MacMillan. And Jen Lawler, just as a side note, was the first women's soccer player to be offered a full ride scholarship at Santa Clara University for women's soccer. So they were going to join her. She's in her senior year. And now you have a couple other San Diegans going up there. Now, her head coach at Santa Clara, he saw something very different. His name was Jerry Smith. He didn't see arrogance, he saw confidence. And he saw a player that was not afraid to speak her mind and at times be brutally honest with the people around her and her assessment of things. He saw a player that always put hard work and training. He would, at the time, call her the most complete athlete he'd ever coached. He said she had great positioning off the ball, great anticipation and instincts defensively, which caused him to shift her role from an attacking midfield role to a defensive midfield role, a position she would pretty much keep up for the rest of her career. And he was very impressed with her because she was not the fastest player by any stretch, but her vision, her awareness, and her anticipation were so good that she just always seemed to be in the right place. During her time at Santa Clara University, she would help lead them to the Final Four each of the 4 years she was there. During the last 2 years, she was named in NSCAA, which is, I forget what's now, it's called the U.S. Soccer Coaches Association, but that's a Soccer Coaches Association, and named to as a first team All-American by them for her last 2 years. In her senior year, again, the Broncos had a very strong team. Her teammate, Mandy Clemens, that she came to Santa Clara with. So not only did she win the CIF Player of the Year, Mandy Clemens ends up winning the Herman Trophy in her senior year at Santa Clara. And they make a deep run in the tournament, but like every year before, the Broncos' run would end the same way it did the previous 3 seasons, losing in the semifinal of the Final Four of the College Cup. So that brings us to early December 1999. Her college career is now over. She hasn't quite finished her senior year. She'll wrap that up in June. And this is the first time Serlenga seems to really be wondering, what is next? Is this the end of my college career? She knew there's always an outside chance she could get called up to a senior U.S. women's national team camp. There were rumors of a new professional league starting up soon, but that was going to be another year away. Were those things realistic, or is this the time to actually hang up her boots and focus on something else? Well, luckily for Serlenga and many other women soccer players at that time, she did not have to wait very long to make a decision about her future. And to understand why, we're going to take a little sidestep here for just a moment. But before we do that sidestep to talk about the contentious relationship between the U.S. women's national team and U.S. soccer, Dylan, I'm going to give you a chance to jump in with any thoughts or comments.
Not really a whole lot to add, but I do think it's interesting how smaller players, like physically smaller players, do tend to get pushed into more attacking roles or like attacking midfield roles because there's just this kind of thought of like athleticism and size and defense. But some of the very best defensive midfielders specifically I could think of off the top of my head have all been somewhat smaller in stature. So not surprised
and not
to
always
hear that.
fast.
Yeah,
either.
right. It's about the reading.
Right. Right, so let's take a slight birdwalk and talk about this contentious relationship between the U.S. women's national team players and U.S. soccer. Now, we're not going to go into a huge amount of detail, and if you do want any detail about this time period in our series that we have put together on the San Diego Spirit, some of those early episodes of that series really talk about this time period as the WUSA is forming or getting ready to form, and after the 1999 World Cup and all the fights that went on. So if you want more information and detail about this time period, you should go check that out. But as a super quick synopsis, 5 months earlier, the U.S. women's national team wins the 1999 World Cup. We're all aware of that if you follow soccer at all. And I would say December of 1999 generally is a very good time for women's soccer in the United States. It has a much higher profile, a lot more interest, more sponsorship interest. Things seem to be starting to turn a corner and go very well. And there's talk about this new women's league, Division I women's league that people are trying to put together. But the U.S. women's national team player pool, this is where they first start this kind of time period from 98 through 2001, really standing up to U.S. soccer and making some very specific demands. So at this moment, in December of 1999, they're in a bit of a contract dispute after what has happened with the World Cup and how the contracts were structured there, how the contracts were structured on the men's side, what happened with their victory tour afterwards, looking forward to the 2000 Olympics. There's a bunch of things on the table, but in December, they're right in the heat of the battle of their labor negotiations. Now, the College Cup usually wraps up right in the first week or two of December. By December 23rd of 1999, the U.S. women's national team players, they unionized here, and they felt that the offers they were getting from U.S. soccer were insulting, really. And they decided they were going to boycott the scheduled January camp. And along with that January camp was a tournament in Australia. So Australia is hosting the Olympics in 2000 in Sydney. So there's a soccer tournament happening in January with some teams being invited, four teams, I think, invited for that. But all the main U.S. women's national team players decide on the 23rd of December, that's it. We're boycotting that camp. We're boycotting that tournament. In fact, we're not coming back till this deal gets solved. Now, that in turn opens a door. Now, I'm going to, this is hard for me because I have to put to the side my feelings about union representation, crossing kind of picket lines, but this does open the door for a lot of the younger players that maybe haven't had a serious look, a lot of the fringe kind of players, because frankly, it was really hard to break into the U.S. women's national team program. We had good players. We were very successful. And, you know, if you didn't kind of crack the lineup right out of college, chances are your career was over at that point. So, and this is kind of where Serlenga was in early December. Like, I don't know, am I done? I'm probably done. Maybe I should go do some other things. So this boycott happens. Now they're sending out invitations to lots of people for this January camp, and Serlenga would be one of those players to get an invitation in January. And that act of that player boycott, it fundamentally changes Serlenga's career pathway, initially, definitely for the next year, for 2000. So again, before we jump into the year 2000, and really because that is Serlenga's big soccer year, Dylan will give you a chance to jump in with any thoughts or comments, and then we'll go into 2000.
Nothing really to add. You kind of touched on the labor question aside. So
yeah. All right, so January camp comes around. There's lots of new players in the camp and people who probably wouldn't have gotten a look, or even if they might have kind of been fringe, it was probably at that time, at a time period in a player's career where they have to make a serious decision. Do I want to do a lot of training in the off season and really show somehow that I'm no longer playing in college, that I could possibly make this team, or am I ready to move along? So Serlenga gets the invitation and decides somewhere in this process, not really sure when exactly, that she was really going to devote all her energy to trying to make this Olympic team, if she gets the opportunity. So they go to this tournament in Australia. Serlenga, for her performance in the camp, gets rewarded with starts in the first 2 matches. She goes the full 90 in both matches. She scores a goal in the first match. She does sit out the final match, but it does seem like the coach is playing lots of different players and different combinations because, these are not your normal starters, and probably looking at who might be some people who could make the national team and possibly the Olympics. So very successful January camp for Serlenga. She does then at the end of January, the U.S. women, on January 30th, they actually come to an agreement with U.S. Soccer. So the main group of the player pool is going to be coming back into the national team camps. And over the next 3 months, we start to see some changes. April Heinrichs is appointed the head coach of the U.S. women's national team at the very end of January, beginning of February, somewhere in there. They had an interim coach, Lauren Gregg, for the camp and the other tournament, but April Heinrichs was expected to be named coach, so she was keeping an eye on what was going on in the camp, and certainly Serlenga caught her eye. So Serlenga gets invited to the 30-player Olympic residency camp that they're starting to figure out who they're going to whittle down to these final 18 players, because that's the roster for the World Cup, only 18 players. You had 20 on the World Cup team from the year before, so cracking that 18-player roster for anyone new. But they get this group of 30 together. Their first tournament is the Algarve Cup, and Serlenga is not invited along to that tournament in Portugal, which is not terribly unexpected. They have most of their main players from their player pool back for that, and that's against some very strong teams. But as soon as they come back from the Algarve Cup, the U.S. Soccer has arranged a couple additional friendlies for the U.S. women's national team, and they pretty much go with all their youngsters, the people who didn't go to Portugal. And the U.S. women's national team, they beat Iceland in one of those friendlies, 8-0, a very young team. Serlenga goes the full 90, and the average age of that particular team that takes on Iceland is just over 20 years of age. So she's kind of in that young group trying to break through. In May, we get the Nike US Women's Cup, and Serlenga is picked for this particular team. And this is the first time in terms of, the full squad going to a tournament and being part of game day rosters, that she is on the team with Shannon MacMillan. And in that opening match on May 5th in 2000, the match we already talked about when we did our trivia question, the U.S. would win 8-0. Serlenga would start. She went the full 90. Shannon MacMillan was also start, making this the first time these two San Pasqual High School graduates have been on the field together for the U.S. women's national team. And again, we believe it is the first time that two non-siblings from the same high school have started a U.S. women's national team match together. It was certainly news in our local papers here in San Diego. Any chance that they were playing together, they would talk about it and talk about them being from the same high school. So it wasn't uncommon news in this particular year of 2000. But no one really ever talked about it as like a statistical significance, that they're the only ones or the first ones who had ever done it. She would come on as a second half sub in the second game of this Nike Women's Cup, a 4-0 victory over Canada. Again, it will be the second time she shares the field with Shannon MacMillan. Then in May, the WUSA, so we're going to switch gears slightly, is ready. They've already announced their cities. So we know who the cities are. The world does. It's public. But we don't know which U.S. women's national team players are going to which cities. And they have stated that there are going to be 3 allocated players from the U.S. women's national team player pool to go to each city. So obviously 3 times 8, 24. Well, the World Cup roster was only 20 players, if I remember correctly, from 99. Might have been 22. Yeah, I can't remember what the actual roster number was, but it wasn't 24. Plus, even from the 99 team, you had players who weren't going to continue on and be part of the WUSA. So you didn't have 24. And they needed a few more players to fill out those player allocations. And Serlenga gets one of those invitations and gets one of those allocations. And so does her Santa Clara teammate and fellow San Diegan, Mandy Clemens. And a couple others were invited to be part of that allocated group. So on the 23rd of May in 2000, the WUSA announces those player allocations. We all know from our history here locally, Shannon MacMillan, Julie Foudy end up at San Diego, at San Diego Spirit, along with Joy Fawcett. Sorry, I forgot the third one. And Serlenga ends up going to Atlanta with the Altanta Beat, although I don't think they actually have their team names yet at this time. But she ends up going to Atlanta. In a couple of articles I read, some interviews with her, she fought really hard to be in San Diego, but I think she was outranked in that, and ended up going to Atlanta. And again, from some of those interviews, seems like she was still a good sport about, like, great, I can always come back to San Diego. I'm going to go see what the rest of the world looks like. There is even something I saw with her where she said, even in the article interview, she felt like a bit of an idiot because she wasn't really sure where Atlanta was in the United States exactly, like roughly, and is like, I need a map. I need to know exactly where this is, where it is in relative, in relation to other things in the area. So she could really wrap her brain around where she was headed for Atlanta. And then just as a side note, Mandy Clemens, the Herman Trophy winner, she would end up in Philadelphia. So we had, again, several San Diegans as part of those 24 players that got allocated out to the various teams in the WUSA. If we flip back to the national team, through May and July, the team plays in several tournaments and friendlies. In May, they have what was called the Pacific Cup at the time. They also played the CONCACAF Women's Gold Cup in June and July, late June, early July. They did another tournament in Germany in July, and then rounded out July with a couple of friendlies in Norway. And it's clear from when you look at all the lineups that were being used of that 30-player roster that they're trying to whittle down, there was a lot of experimenting with different lineups, different people. But Serlenga got a good number of starts through that run. And if she didn't start, she frequently came off the bench as a sub. And I think that's still at the time where we were doing 3 subs. So not the 5 that we have now. So still, she saw a lot of minutes and had a lot of action in the matches. And, it seemed, looking at the match reports, because I don't remember all of this in detail from 2000, but that she frequently would come on for an attacking. If she didn't start, she'd come on for an attacking player later in the game when they had the lead. Tagger would come off, another defensive midfielder comes into the game. So not an uncommon, coaching move and tactic. All right. In early August, the 10th of August, the Olympic team is named. Again, the Olympics are only an 18-player roster. 15 of those spots go to players who had played on the 1999 World Cup winning squad, leaving only 3 spots open for newcomers. And Serlenga was one of the 3 newcomers to make the team. And maybe a little surprising to some people, Mandy Clemens, the other San Diegan, who was your Herman Trophy winner and was the San Diego CIF Player of the Year when she was in high school, did not make the final cut. And probably mostly because she was an attacking player. And at that time, we had a, fountain of attackers. We were not lacking for people in the attacking positions. But Serlenga does make it as a defensive midfielder on the team. Again, one of only 3 newcomers to make it on the Olympic team that weren't part of that 1999 World Cup roster. We get to the Olympics in Sydney in September, and Serlenga is an unused sub in the first match. She does come on as a sub in the second match. She actually comes on for Shannon MacMillan. And then in a 1-1 tie with China, and she comes on as a halftime sub in a 3-1 victory over Nigeria in the final group match. Unfortunately for Serlenga, she does not see the pitch after that in any of the knockout rounds or the final. And the U.S., again, takes home the silver medal at Sydney, losing in the final. And now I'm trying to remember to who. I think to Norway for that year. And then for the end of 2000, post-Olympics, there were a couple other matches that she played in one in November and one in December, and that kind of rounded out 2000. 2000 was her big year for the U.S. women's national team. And then things would change dramatically. So we're going to pause there for a second. Dylan, I'll let you jump in with any questions or comments, and then we'll talk about the first year, or we'll talk about at least, I guess, the 3 years kind of together of the WUSA.
I don't think I have anything to add. I was just going to look up to try and confirm the who they played in the final. It was Norway, yeah. So
yeah, I was gonna say, I was pretty sure it was Norway. Yeah, but you did not see any action in those matches. But as 2000 is wrapping up, and as the plans were for the WUSA, it was to launch in the year after the Summer Olympics, because again, for the women, you've got the World Cup 1 year, the Olympics the next year, and then you've got a couple years before you've got to start thinking about, getting into that cycle again of World Cups, of preparation at least for the next World Cup. So the WUSA is scheduled to start, and does, in March of 2001. We already said that Serlenga was allocated to the Altanta Beat, where she becomes a mainstay as defensive midfielder. She plays nearly every minute of every match in that 2001 season, and helps lead them all the way to the final, where they would lose in penalties to the Bay Area Cyber Rays. It was 3-3 at the end of regulation, 4-2 in penalties. Serlenga would be one of the 2 players from the Altanta Beat to actually make her kick from the spot, but they would end up losing in that very first WUSA final. She was called in October for another national team camp let me back up. In July, she was called into camp and played 2 matches, and that was one of the ones we referenced on our incorrect date for our trivia question. So the 30th of June of that summer 2001, she played in a 2-2 tie with Canada, where she came on as halftime sub, and then she came in as the late sub on the 3rd of July as well, a 3-0 victory over Canada. But those would ultimately end up, she wouldn't know it at the time, but those would end up being her final 2 U.S. women's national team matches of her career. They pretty much all happened in the year 2000. She exploded onto the scene. She got her way into the team. She played in the Olympics. And then the next year in 2001, she got a couple looks in July. She was invited to the camp later that year in October, but never made the roster for any future matches after that. And then she stays in the WUSA. She stays with Atlanta for all 3 years. In 2002, again, plays nearly every minute of every match. They lose to Carolina in the semifinals. In 2003, which would ultimately end up being the final year of the WUSA, they would again make it all the way to the finals, where the Altanta Beat would again lose this time to the Washington Freedom in the finals, which actually took place in San Diego for that year in 2003. And then, league folds, we know, if we know our history of the WUSA, and that's it. Serlenga never plays high-level soccer ever again. And before we kind of get to the epilogue of kind of what happened in between there, for her, just again, bright shining star briefly, and then nothing. Dylan will give you a chance to jump in with any thoughts or comments, and then we'll wrap this up.
Well, I mean, we've talked about this before, but it just kind of speaks to it's too bad when there aren't, more professional opportunities for players. And, maybe she didn't want that. It kind of sounds like it wasn't everything she had in mind for herself, which is totally fair. But, if she had wanted to keep playing high level soccer, it's too bad that there really wasn't a way to do it here in the United States, especially considering the way that, women's soccer was really kind of the face of women's sports for most of my life up until the last 10 years or so. So it's just, it's a shame. But, it's good for her for grabbing that opportunity by the neck and making the most of it. I don't think a lot of people can say that. And the last thing, you don't get team names like the Bay Area Cyber Rays anymore. That's right. Just very 1990s.
Very much. And the graphics, oh my goodness. Yeah, you have to go. If you haven't seen them, anybody who's listening, you should really also go check out the graphic. I think any soccer logos from teams that started in the 90s, they're very interesting design choices that happened when everybody has new electronic tools to work with. They're not always the best, but they certainly reflect the time period. Some Microsoft Paint inspired designs there. All right, let's get to our epilogue here. In an interview just prior to the 2000 Olympics, Serlenga said that playing in the Olympics and playing just at a high level in women's soccer were definitely on her radar when she was a very young player. But by her own admission, she said she lost a little focus during her high school days and her college years. But then when the opportunity came in early 2000 and April Heinrichs took over the team, she basically put the rest of her life on hold and put everything into making that 2000 Olympic team. Now, one of the things that I gathered also, and you alluded to this a second ago, is in reading a lot about Serlenga, now, we talked about how some coaches felt since she didn't put time into soccer outside of her normal training and normal other things, she just didn't seem committed. I would take and argue and look at that as like she had some good life skills, that this wasn't the only thing in her life. And driving it, she enjoyed it. She seemed to enjoy it. She liked doing it. But it wasn't the only thing, and didn't seem to be like the only thing she wanted to do in her life or the only thing she wanted to necessarily be known for in her life. So she put everything into making this Olympic team, and it paid off. She made the Olympics. She got a silver medal from the Olympics, and that also parlayed into a 3-year stint in the WUSA, where she starred for the Altanta Beat and helped take them to 2 finals. But shortly before the 2003 Founders Cup, that's the name of the WUSA championship game, with the one they were playing in San Diego in that final year in 2003, the North County Times had a big profile on Serlenga. And I thought it was very interesting because there was an interview I saw just before the Olympics where she thanked April Heinrichs, saying, yeah, she helped get me focused and all the extra work and everything else I needed to put into making this team and being a part of it. Her tone and the things she said were quite a bit different 3 years later when she's, the ancient age of 25, getting ready for her final. And some of the comments asked, like, you were on the national team and you weren't part of the national team anymore. And there was some phrasing around Heinrichs dropping her from the national team. And part of her comments was more like, after 2000, I decided to take a step back from international soccer. It was just too time consuming. There were other things in life, based on what she said, there was other things in life she wanted to enjoy. She liked some of the things she were doing in Atlanta. She had also met someone who was going to become her future husband there in Atlanta, and he was also an athlete. We'll talk a little bit about that in a second. But it really seems like, she competed in the WUSA, and once the WUSA was not an option anymore, for her at least, didn't seem like I have to go find another way to get back to the national team. It almost seemed like, okay, now it's time to do other things. And it was very difficult to find out through, we have a short turnaround for these episodes, so very difficult to find out what she might have done with soccer afterwards. Really had a difficult time finding anything. What it seems like has happened is she met her future husband, who was a basketball player from Georgia Tech, while she was in Atlanta. He ended up pursuing a professional, playing professionally in Paris. So it sounds like they spent some time in Paris together, and she was supporting him while he was doing his playing career. It also seems like he then eventually got into coaching, and he's back in the NBA structure. And they've been back, I think, since 2018. And the last I saw, I don't know if he still is, didn't have the time to get in and check the Clippers coaching staff, but the last I saw, he was part of the LA Clippers coaching staff. So it seems like after all this, Serlenga finally came full circle and made it back to Southern California. She was inducted into the Santa Clara Athletics Hall of Fame in 2019. And also in 2019, I saw an interesting story from the U.S. Army website, their kind of PR area. And Serlenga, Shannon MacMillan, Saskia Weber, and Stacy Wilson all traveled to Japan and Guam as part of a 2-week tour. This is back in 2019, to do couple of weeks to do some soccer camps for the children of our troops over there in both Guam and Japan. So there was an article where she had some comments. So clearly there is some kind of connection still with either some players, some people, but I don't know if she's coaching. I don't know what she's doing. And that's happened sometimes, again, when we do these quick turnaround shows. But it was interesting to see that fairly recently, pre-pandemic, she was involved with some fellow national team players and out there doing some coaching clinics. So that kind of wraps up our story, our kind of quick meteoric rise of Nikki Serlenga to the U.S. Women's National Team, and then the WUSA, and then it ended. And not really sure what, again, she contributed back to soccer, or if she did it all, or she found other things to pursue. But that's where we're going to leave it here on this episode. So Dylan, we'll turn it over to you for some last thoughts or comments before we close up our episode.
Yeah, I mean, sometimes things just sort of end. It's just the way life goes. But I'm glad, she was able to, it sounds like, stick around the game a little bit if she was involved in, traveling to military bases to work with kids. I think that's pretty cool. So yeah, maybe it's just one of those things where it'll always be in her back pocket, but isn't, like you said, just not the most important thing in her life. I think I did catch the answer to the trivia question, though. So we'll, when we come to that, I do believe I was paying enough attention.
Yeah, I'm. Yeah, and I don't know if I actually think I didn't say it during, so I don't know if you read it through a rundown. So I'm going to do it, and I'll give the answer, and I'll give some of the other historical context, just in case, because I think I might have actually forgotten to actually say the answer. But let's go ahead and pull it up on the screen again. So we know that they played together at some point, Nikki Serlenga and Shannon MacMillan, but how many times did they actually start together for the U.S. Women's National Team? Again, this all happened during 2000, because that was really her big time with the U.S. Women's National Team. We said it was in single digits, so Dylan, maybe I did say it, but we'll give you a chance to jump in. What is your guess as to the answer?
Well, I guess I did see it in the rundown, but it looks like either 5 or 6, depending on the reading of your phrasing here. So I'll go with 6. But
Yeah, I think 5 confirmed, and this is one of the problems with some of these stats and going back to these match reports, is that they're not always clear depending where you get them, or they don't list sometimes whether a person started or they're not clean, good, normal match reports. It's someone else's summary of a match report. So sometimes you don't always know, but pretty clear there are definitely 5. There might be more that they started together for the U.S. women's national team. They played more than 20 times. They were on the same game day roster. Now, how many times they were actually on the field together is hard to tell sometimes because we don't always have times with a sub. MacMillan got subbed out at a certain point, and maybe Serlenga came into the match at a certain point. But you don't know if there was some crossover. They also had at least 7 additional times, besides the time they started, where they were on the field together. And 3 times, Serlenga actually substituted for Shannon MacMillan specifically in a match. And I think in every one of those, it was a match where the U.S. was leading. Clearly a tactical move, pulling off an attacker and putting in a defensive midfielder. But there was a lot of times they were together. And again, as the 2 of them joked in an article that I read talking about, both of them playing together and being from the same high school, that was also at the time where Jovan Karofsky was playing and people knew his name. And he had also gone to San Pasqual High School. So they'd always talk about the 3 of them that were playing professionally, all from the same high school and playing professionally at the same time. So a lot of times they played together. And again, I just, outside of siblings, I don't know that I've ever really recalled players. I know on the men's side it happened. We had our group from Kearney, New Jersey, especially from the 90 and 94 World Cup squads. But I just don't remember seeing that on the women's side. So, and I dug to try to find out, and so far I haven't found any other example. But that's where we are. Five times that they started together. It wasn't just a one-off. And I don't know. Again, I remember vaguely some of the matches she played in back in 2000, but Lori Fair was also, they shared similar positions and they kind of split time quite a bit. But I think her time was so short with the national team. Like it kind of exploded onto the scene, and then she did the WUSA, and then she just seemed like I was done. And based on her comments, it seemed like, yeah, I stepped away from the national team because it was just too much. It was too much to do professional soccer and try to do international soccer. Like she had a life she wanted to lead outside of soccer, which again, I think actually, I know some people may look at that as not committed. I look at that as healthy. Good to have some boundaries along those lines. All right. Any other thoughts or comments before we do a quick closing? We have one in memoriam that we're going to do on this episode, but before we get there, any last thoughts or comments on?
I think it's all that's needed to has been said, I believe.
All right. Well, we do have one remembrance to do as we close up our episode. 12 years ago, this week, on the 3rd of July, Volkmar Gross, longtime San Diego Soccer's goalkeeper, around about the same time as Alan Mayer that we mentioned earlier. So basically from 79 to 83. He played for them between 79 and 83. He died in 2014, as we said, about 12 years ago. And he has a very interesting story that we're going to have to tell at some point, because I think of all the San Diego Soccer's goalkeepers, he if you really watch the Soccers back then, you'll remember the name. But if you didn't, he's not one that gets named frequently. But there's a very interesting story in how he got to the U.S. that involves match fixing. So I think there's an interesting story all the way around with that, and then how he got to the U.S. and then played, and even allowed to still play. But there's some interesting stories around there. So that'll be our little teaser. Maybe next summer around the anniversary, we might do something around this with Volkmar Gross. All right, that's our little bit of in memoriam for this week. Would like to point out, as we mentioned in the beginning of the show, in terms of looking for matches to go and see, there is a lower league men's match happening this Sunday, the 5th of July, 4 p.m. at Canyon Crest Academy. It is the round of 32 of the UPSL National Playoffs. The Hoya Nomads will be taking on Next Level Soccer from Arizona. I think specifically Gilbert, Arizona is where they're from, but somewhere around the Phoenix area. So Nomads will take on Next Level Soccer in the round of 32 on the 5th of July, this Sunday, 4 p.m., Canyon Crest Academy. If you're looking for World Cup conflicts, there is the Brazil-Norway match earlier in the day. That should end, even if it goes to penalty kicks before this match starts. But this local soccer match will have some overlap with a match that could include Mexico and or England. So that might dictate whether some people show up or not. But we do have a match there coming up locally in the playoffs for UPSL. And I have to see what my schedule's like. If it was going to be on the 4th, there was no way I was going to make it because they have to play either the 4th or the 5th for this round of playoffs. But since it's on Sunday, I'm going to see if I can work out my schedule to head on out there, since I wasn't able to make their match this last week. Dylan, any chance you head out there? Or is this 4th of July weekend look busy for you?
No, not particularly. I do have some things I need to get done though, so it's unlikely. And as usual, anything that keeps me out after 5 on a Sunday is always a bit of a tough ask. So, but
Right.
You never know.
Yeah. All right. Just to remind you, This Week in San Diego Soccer History is brought to you by the San Diego Soccer History Society, grassroots organization looking to uncover and preserve San Diego's rich soccer history and culture. And if you like what we're doing, please help spread the word. If you're on YouTube watching us, please like and subscribe. Help us get the video in front of the eyes of other people who might be interested in soccer history, especially as it pertains to San Diego. You can engage with us in our community section here on YouTube. Follow us on Blue Sky at sdsoccerhistory.org. And if you like all those things, San Diego soccer and history, consider joining our volunteer team of researchers. And you can go ahead and get a hold of me at john@bigpinedigital.com, and we will get you connected. All right, I hope everyone enjoyed this week's episode on Nikki Serlenga, one of the pair of non-sibling players from the same high school to start the same match for the U.S. women's national team, along with Shannon MacMillan. We're going to be back next week, where we're going to finally start our series. We've talked about a bit on past episodes, but finally start our series on the 1968 NASL Toros, which leads us to this week's trivia question that we're going to leave you with. And I'm going to tell you right now, on the surface, this question may seem like it has absolutely nothing to do with soccer or nothing to do with San Diego. So let's give the trivia question first, and then we will talk about it. All right, prior to Pete Rose's lifetime banishment in 1989, who was the last person to be banned for life from Major League Baseball? Again, that probably sounds on the surface like it has absolutely nothing to do with what we're going to talk about next week, but I guarantee you it has a very, very direct connection to both U.S. soccer history in general and San Diego soccer history in particular. So if you want to find out how, you'll have to listen to our next episode. All right, Dylan, any final thoughts before we head out of here?
You're right. That doesn't seem like it has anything to do with San Diego soccer history.
Nope. Nothing.
Either I'm about to learn that Shoeless Joe Jackson was actually a San Diego soccer player, or I have zero idea what the answer to this question is. So, yeah, no idea.
He was not. He was not the most recent one before.
See, that's what I don't
Pete
know.
Rose.
I don't know that. I have no idea.
Yeah. So yes, there is, and I'll, not that it will help probably most people, but I'll say the last person before Pete Rose, I don't remember the exact year, but it was the early 40s. I want to say 43, but that's a time frame we're looking at.
No
All
idea.
right. So again, we will give that answer next time. So no thoughts or anything, but Dylan, we kind of almost talked about a second, but I will ask you more specifically now. Do you have any specific plans for America's semi-quincentennial? I had to find out what the word was this time around. Because I remember growing up, we talked about this before, like bicentennial was ingrained to everybody's, like all the lexicon in 1976. And I don't think once in 2026 that I have heard the term semi-quincentennial for the 250th birthday celebration. So anything special plans?
Well, first of all, did not know it was semi-quincentennial. I was familiar with 150 being sesquicentennial because I think California hit that landmark not too long ago. So that's interesting. No, just usual 4th of July shenanigans. Just gonna hang out with some friends. Probably keep it pretty low key. How about yourself?
Probably same. Have some family over, I have to say, and I expect it to be big this year. We live just on a little bit of a hill and look out over a lot of Escondido, and Escondido does not disappoint in terms of the local fireworks. In fact, it has gotten so prevalent since the pandemic moving forward that I think all of us in Escondido have received numerous alerts and announcements how they will be enforcing the $1,000 fine for fireworks this 4th of July. So I imagine it probably won't deter very many people this year. Maybe it will, I don't know, but probably will curb things a lot, and they might go for it one last time. But the fireworks we get looking out across Escondido are way better than what you get put on by the city of Escondido. And for better or worse, it goes on from about 9 to midnight. It goes on and on and on and on. But it has been getting worse in terms of more. And certainly, as enjoyable as it is to sit on a balcony and watch all the fireworks, we live in an area that's ripe for fire and not the safest thing to be doing, certainly. So it'll probably be, we'll have family over like we usually do. We'll grill, we'll hang out at the pool, and we'll sit on the balcony and see what fireworks happen this time around for us. But that'll be it. Nothing special in terms of the 250th birthday celebration, other than hoping we make it to 251.
Last year in my neighborhood, the fireworks started around noon on July 2nd. So which I don't even understand. It's light outside, doesn't seem to make a lot of sense, but maybe they're just practicing. So yeah, I'm fully getting ready for that, I guess.
Yeah, we've already had a few practice ones here and there, but I think most people around here really save it for they wait till the city ones finish and then they start.
Fair
the city
enough.
ones, I don't know if they go at 8:30 or 9, but they go for about 15 or 20 minutes, and then after that, everything else erupts, and you get all the other fireworks. All right. Well, Dylan, I hope you enjoy your 4th of July. I know I always do, especially with family coming over. But for us, that wraps everything up for this episode. Don't forget to send in your answers to this week's trivia question. And we will see you next time on This Week in San Diego Soccer History. Good night.